Katie Bennett-Stenton, a senior B2B marketer with 20 years experience across the UK, United States and Asia Pacific. I recently returned from 3 exciting months with Deloitte in Chicago, where I put my kids into school and finalised their US citizenship. During that time, I was delighted to have the opportunity to spend time with a number of global experts. Throughout that period, I interviewed a range of thought leaders and shared their thought-provoking, relevant and influential takeaways weekly. Now that I'm back in Melbourne, the Katie Talks conversation with influencers continues. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Rob Steers, Head of Digital and a partner at Step Change. Rob, welcome, and perhaps you could give a little more colour as to your background, please.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be able to talk to you. Yes, my background is diverse. My parents ran a restaurant. My dad was a mechanic. I grew up when the internet was growing up. I think I built my first website in the mid 90s, and it was horrible, but it got me a gig over the millennial 99-2000 period, and then came to Australia from the UK. And I built a social media website, my own social media website, in about 2002. And once again, it was equally horrible. And I really wish that I could resurrect it, because it's such a good idea about bringing sports people together to share. But unless I have a significant amount of time or money on my hands, that is not likely to happen.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I'm really, really delighted to be chatting with you today.
No problem.
And I guess the other element of your background was the few years that we worked together at Deloitte in Australia. So
yeah, yes, and that was great. I really did enjoy working with you and working at Deloitte. I think I learned a lot working with you on social media. So thank you.
No, thank you. So Rob, your professional focus is social media, and I've benefited from your deep expertise considerably. Why is it something that you're so passionate about?
It's one-to-one, and it's great to be in touch with people. And I think for all its flaws and all of its benefits, really fundamentally, it's about people connecting with each other. And I think brands can use that well and poorly as well. And I'm passionate about it because I think it's probably a marketer's dream in terms of that genuine connection and communication with the market and their customers and so on.
I like it. Talking about cultivating personal brand and eminence, that's something that you and I are both passionate about.
Yes.
What impact can social media have on our personal brands?
That's a great question. I think you become more of a reflection of the things that are around you, if I can put it that way. So if you look at, people would say, oh, my personal brand is this, and I define it as that. But actually, you can see it as things that you share and the way that you act and how you behave on social media. So again, for the good and the bad, people commenting and sharing racist things that go against what they would project as their personal brand, you fundamentally become a reflection of what your personal brand actually is, rather than what you think it is. And I think that's, again, the power of that social media and the blurring of personal and business worlds and lines. And I think, that with social media purveying and being everywhere, on your TV and on your Alexa in the corner of your room, on your phone, I think it's just going to be, it's like some Black Mirror episode where there is no distinction between who we are and our personal brand and social media. I think it's just going to be inextricably linked.
It's interesting. I mean, we're I guess almost every day seeing examples of that blurring of personal and professional lines. What's your view on how positive or negative that is? I mean, it has certainly gotten some people into all sorts of strife. Looking at the college scandal of a whole lot of wealthy and influential people in the States recently. Some very, very senior people looking after, in inverted commas, their kids,
Mm.
in arguably the professional realm of their life is going to impact really heavily on their professional. But talk me through a bit more about your views on that blurring and whether that's a good thing or not.
Uh, I think it is a good thing. Maybe I'm a bit too optimistic. I think it's a good thing. Uh, and ultimately, I think it's something along the lines of, we get the social media that we deserve, and we probably deserve, this. Some people deserve this transparency. Now, of course, people who are very clever will manipulate it, almost perfectly,
Mm.
because it is that easy to manipulate, and we've definitely seen that. But I think that generally we've got this sort of, we're getting the newspapers and the news that we deserve, and we're getting the social media and the platforms that we deserve. And I think they are positive things. I think that they are being misused, and that is negative. And I think that social media companies have too much power in some regards, and it's being abused, and that is overwhelmingly negative. But I think in terms of a society and the progress that we're making, sometimes you have to go through a downward dip in order to come up the other side and say, well, we have to put a stop to that. Yeah, but like I said, I'm an optimist.
Well, and I think far better in life to be an optimist than the alternate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It'd be a pretty dull podcast if I was just sitting here going, "It's all over. It's dead." Yeah.
Bad, it's risky,
Yes,
it's
that's
terrible.
right. Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
Rob, getting into that social license element, I think is something that we're reading a whole lot more about, and is becoming an ever stronger theme in the media in the current climate. From the recent Royal Commission, increasingly part of the dialogue in the mining, power, utilities, oil and gas industry that I focus on professionally. Following that along, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and other social media have certainly not been immune to this. How should social media organisations, and I guess social media more generally, stay relevant and maintain their social license?
I like to think that they will have to maintain relevancy, otherwise it'll be taken away from them. I've heard of increasing number of platforms that effectively are decentralized, and there's various case studies of countries, even one in the center of Congo. They ran their entire elections on a decentralized platform that allowed people to vote remotely. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And I think that they need to maintain relevancy, because those platforms are going to come along and people will just move off of Facebook. It won't be your grandma sharing pictures of you anymore. It'll be nobody.
Hmm.
And I think that that's why they need to change. I think that they need to effectively get out of bed with the data and the advertising players and find a way to get back to why Facebook was created in the first place, which is for people to share stories and and potentially reduce the amount of money they make. That's effectively what it'll be. Otherwise, someone will take it away from them. Even things like Uber and some of those other platforms centrally are being decentralized. So I think that there's a couple of things they need to do. I think they need to bring more of the people who are using the platform into having a say how the platform is run. They need to be increasingly transparent about where the money is coming from. And I think they are doing this. I think they are trying to move in that direction. It's been too long moving in one direction. Now they've got to come the other way. I think recently with the the horrific images from Christchurch, Facebook published a report on how they handled it. And that's starting to show how they can try to get some of that social license back.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you were talking earlier about social media predominantly being, for advocating and contributing to the greater good. My mind was going to the horrific news out of Christchurch with the manifesto and live streaming of the awful things that happened, and I was trying to formulate a question around that when you were talking and didn't quite come up with something, but that. Yeah, there are certainly a huge number of changes that that are coming, I think, on that front.
Mm,
Do you have confidence, given the amount of might and the data
mm.
organizations that Facebook and the like are in bed with? Do do you feel optimistic that they will be able to decentralize and re-establish some social license to operate?
Well, if we're specifically talking about those platforms, maybe not.
Hmm.
But I think social media would and does. And I think the thing about the images and how they were distributed, it just seems that, well, Facebook was the method that person used, but I feel like it could have been any other method, maybe with the
Sure.
exception of, even TV. In the days of the O.J. Simpson's car chase, they
Yeah.
streamed that live.
Hmm.
So I think that people pointing at saying, well, this is the evil of social media, don't really understand the history of humanity and how these people want to publicize their what they do. I think that that's not really Facebook's fault that happened, and they seem to have worked quite hard to try to take all those images down. I think in the future they'll need to keep doing much, much more than that. But if they don't, I think that there'll be another platform that will come along.
Mm.
There are fledgling platforms starting to kind of nip in around the edges. It'll just be about whether or not Facebook decides to buy those platforms or not,
Yeah.
whether or not they stay independent.
Yeah.
But yes.
But I mean, I do think you make a good point, that if not Facebook, another will surely come in and take its place.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there'll be something. I mean, there was, before YouTube, there was 20 video sharing sites.
Yeah.
Before Facebook, there were social platforms, and there'll be more in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Rob, you were my social oracle for my first few years at Deloitte, and we did some really interesting work together, some of which I still emulate and still talk to others about. I'm keen to understand in a little bit more detail how your thoughts about how social media is evolving.
I think this one, sort of feeds into what's coming next over the horizon, and how are we going to get there. Uh, and I mean, my personal view is I think that there's going to be a much more personal control, personal social platforms, and probably in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
There's been a few platforms that have risen up in the last couple of years, and they're still just too junior, too small, really, to talk about. But they give you individual control over sharing and connections, and you own everything about you and that data. And really, it is that decentralized platform with many different ways to connect, and no one really owns it. And I think that's what it'll be for people, is similar to the old personal website type thing, but this will be your own personal connection into a social network. And effectively, maybe in 10 years time, it'll be a key that lets you into anything, including containing your identification, but it'll sit on your phone and it'll do all those
Mm.
things at the same time.
That's interesting. So is the key component there to what you see is coming over the horizon, that you maintain ownership of your data and content, as distinct from it becoming owned by the platform that you're due to post on?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so, because if you look at the wave of adoption of how these technologies become mainstream, it's usually at the cutting edge or the fringe of people who are tech savvy, adopting it first. And
Hmm.
people who have been leaving Facebook and Instagram are those sort of tech savvy millennials, if you want to use that term.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to adopt a platform like that allows them to just have complete control. What WhatsApp was interesting for people because it was completely secure encryption and
Mm.
nobody could share it until Facebook bought it. That's why people used it. And
Yeah.
I think there'll be something like that'll be fully decentralized. Yeah, and people will use it because they can control everything about that data.
I like that. Yeah, I like that analogy, or that example.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a few other platforms where used for different means, but the messages are deleted after a period of time and all of that sort of thing. I think that's what people want from a platform.
Yes.
So I think that that's where it'll go, and what will make it social is you'll be able to manage your contacts and share images and do all the things you can do on Facebook. Say you're going to an event, share information about that event, but it'll all be contained look, hey, it's probably going to be on the blockchain. Let's face it, everything else seems to be
Yep.
heading that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. Do you have any specific predictions about platforms, or is that shall we check back in and at some time in the future on that front?
Yeah, let's check back in and something like that front. This maybe you're probably starting to get at my own existential theories around things. I always think that the rules stay the same, just the method changes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there'll be just another way that your TV will suddenly become the center of everyone's lounge room again, or something like that. What's old is new.
Yeah,
I think that tends to be the cycle.
I like it. Rob, in a rather sassy manner, your LinkedIn profile prompts readers to ask you about how politicians rank socially. Even if you don't mention the current crazy incumbent in the White House, I'm really, really keen to hear you talk a little bit about on this topic. Let me try that again. I'm really interested to hear you talk a bit more on this topic.
Yeah, so that I built this bit of code a while ago that allowed you to see all the politicians' social profiles and how much they shared and how well that was shared, and then a sentiment against that sharing. So was it a positive share or a negative one? And you could then see, okay, how much are politicians influencing social narrative by posting, their thoughts, and it was not complicated to work out how that something like
Yeah.
that would work. And it was interesting because it was relatively predictive. The first time I built it, it showed that Julia Gillard was exceeding Kevin Rudd in social reach, and then not long after she toppled him. So I wonder if there's something. I wonder if there's something more to that. I think again, it just comes back to that narrative within the community and how much is that controlled through social media. And I think that you can use tools like that to see, are particular politicians and driving their own narrative well, or are they driving it badly? And how much does that impact it? Because we've seen, in elections, they've shown how Facebook feeds have been manipulated by sharing or other means, and how much people see those messages and interact with them can dictate how much they think about things. So I think tracking that in the future, could be an interesting way to look at changes in elections or even changes to policy, because how much is a politician actually sharing or liking or commenting around a particular social issue?
That sounds really interesting. So is that a tool that you're using at the moment?
It's like a lot of the different things that I've created. It's collecting dust on a hard drive somewhere. But I mean, I've got the theory, so maybe I'll wheel it out again in time for the next Australian election, and it might be a bit of fun.
Well, that sounds really interesting. Oh, there's a big election coming up in the US next year. Maybe that's how
Yes.
you make your millions, Rob.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I'll be like a rather poor imitation of 538 or something like that, based purely around
Yeah.
likes and tweets. Yeah.
Oh, I like it. Well, don't forget your friends when you
No,
become
of
rich
course
and
not.
famous. Rob, do you think social media can be used as a tool for selling, or are you more in the camp that this is just a myth promoted by the social networks?
That is an interesting question. I think it does depend. There are some markets where we've seen, for our clients anyway, that social media is a critical tool for selling. Some B2C brands have used it for corporate journalism, which something like Maersk is a big case study around that. There are some that use it for direct to consumer sales using Facebook as a marketplace, and we can see that works because of the types of people using it. But I don't think that it's for everybody. And I think that especially if you look at B2B brands, you have to wonder how much time and effort they invest in particular social channels versus the return. Now, I know obviously you and I have seen where career, corporate careers, that sort of thing, HR recruitment on social media works quite well.
Yeah.
That element of a brand, but I just don't know that it's for everybody yet, and maybe it never will be. I think that it can be a vanity thing for some brands to be active on LinkedIn, but there are some areas where it is critical, and we have seen it work, and there is a great channel to market that way.
Okay, so more to crudely summarize, you see more applicability in the B2C world than B2B?
Generally, obviously,
Yeah.
that's a big brush to
Well,
paint
it
everything
is.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on LinkedIn, I get so many requests from people who want to sell me something and I know that that's a sample size of one, but I think
Mm.
that most people seem to give that feedback. We have used LinkedIn really well for content and driving sort of interest for a brand, but if you want to look at the ROI, I think the jury might well still be out on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, okay. How do you think I'm interested to understand what your view is in terms of how wary people are about the way that their data is used by in the social media realm. Is that
Mm.
is that paranoia? Is that a relevant concern that people have?
I think people are wary about the wrong things. From the amount of times people spend discussing certain topics around social media, I think the general public just have no idea about what things that they should actually care about. And that sounds so horrible when I say that out loud, but the number of conversations hear about people saying, oh, my phone must be listening to me because I'm getting really targeted ads now. And I think, well, that phone may well be listening to you, maybe not. It's probably just predicted behaviors and your interest in a topic. But the fact that it's serving you specific advertising should be the least of your worries in terms of how social media are using your data. Cambridge Analytica was the small tip of the overall iceberg in terms of how people's news feeds are being manipulated based on what Facebook know about them, what they see, what they don't see. And I think also how much of that data is packaged up and sold off in ways that you can't even imagine
Mm-hmm.
to companies that use it to figure out more about you. The other part of that is how open you have made your social network. So suddenly your identity can easily be stolen.
Sure.
And if people spend as much time worrying about their password strength as they did about their ads that were targeting them, maybe people's identities wouldn't be stolen. So I just think that people worry about the wrong elements of social media and data.
So are password strengths more along the lines of what the general public should be worrying about?
Well, yeah, maybe that sounds a little pointy when you put it like that. I think their overall security and what they post about themselves and their social profile is what they should be worried about, not how the social networks are using
Okay.
the data. I think they should just be more aware. It's like in my nan wouldn't let my parents have an Alexa in the house because she was like, it's listening to us all the time, and from being grown up in the 30s when governments used to,
Yeah.
inverted commas, listen to their people, right? And
Yeah.
then suddenly we've just allowed that to happen wholesale. Now we post everything about ourselves. I think just people being a bit more wary about the things that they post about, or not, or post everything and then not be surprised when something happens.
Hmm. Okay. I reckon that's a topic for a whole other podcast. I have
Probably.
many questions I'd like to ask you on that front, but we might do another one around security, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Good
Yeah.
idea.
Okay. I like it. Rob, is there any one thing that you'd change about the business environment of today?
That's a good question. I think I would change how we look at developing people. And I know that's off topic to social media, but I think
That's okay.
I think it's something that I believe in. Discussions. I still get discussions from comments from CEOs saying if I develop my people, they'll just leave and go somewhere, and get paid better. And I feel like it's just totally the wrong lens to be looking at.
I think Richard Branson's got a good comment on that front, doesn't he?
I
Develop them so
Yes,
that
that's right.
so that they are highly employable elsewhere, but treat them
Well
well
enough
so they
so they
won't want to go
stay.
elsewhere. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's true, but I think that's definitely true, and maybe people might even believe that, and say it out loud. But I think it's sort of looking at that cost of development and giving people the opportunity to grow. Just too many businesses that I've seen don't want to do that, or alternatively, they want to hire only fully trained and highly skilled people without looking at their pipeline of new talent.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that'd be a big thing I'd change.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, do you learn more from success or failure?
I think you learn a lot more from failure. I think it depends on the character that you have in terms of the introspection around why you failed. But I definitely believe there's a lot more to be learnt from failure. Uh, that being said, obviously you need a lot of success in order to be successful. So there's one thing to be a pariah or whatever the word is, but yeah, I think you need a lot of failure and you need to learn from it. Another way to look at this is something I heard the other day, which is effectively as you go through your career and go through life, the failures become bigger and they become harder to surmount. And the reason is that as you grow, of course, the things that are failures have to grow too, because as you look back over your career 10 years ago, something that was a failure for you then would be nothing. It'd be day to day for you now.
Okay,
So, yeah.
that's an interesting perspective, I think. Rob, what does nirvana look like in your career?
I think that is, again, a difficult question because for me, I feel a bit freer in terms of walking around and just going into where whatever takes me next. I don't think I've ever really planned more than a few years ahead of where I am,
Hmm.
and I tend to just sort of try to keep growing and keep growing into the next thing and into the next thing. And I've often thought about running companies and being heads of marketing, but for now, I'd say if I could keep, and this is very going to sound very cliched saying it out loud, but if I could keep growing and keep learning every single day, that would be fine by me.
No, I like that. I don't know that you necessarily need to have a blueprint as to how the rest of your career is going to turn out.
No, no.
And Rob, just in closing, what is the best piece of business advice that you have ever been given?
I think, yes, the best piece of advice was probably from my grandfather because he said something to the effect of, when you're doing really well, at some point you have to decide when you want to get off that particular roller coaster,
Okay.
and then give somebody else a turn on that particular roller coaster. So I think some people hang on too long and some people quit too soon. But I think, be determined until you start to succeed and then figure out who's going to take your place is probably how I would summarize that.
I like that. And that also goes back to your comments earlier about looking at the growth and development of people and giving them opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
I like it. Well, Rob, thank you very much for your time today. I think it's been really interesting. We've covered a number of great topics. I've appreciated your insights, and I'm really confident that listeners are going to enjoy them as well.
I hope so. And hopefully they'll comment and let us know what they think.
Yes, most certainly. Thanks,
Very
Rob.
good.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
Katie.
thanks for listening to the Katie Talks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review me on iTunes to help others find this great content. I have some excellent leaders coming up in the series. Subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And I love feedback from listeners. You can find me at Katie B Marketing on Twitter or Katie Bennett-Stenton on LinkedIn.